Welcome to Beat Diabetes. I'm Dennis Pollock, and if you've watched many of my videos, you've probably seen me sitting in this chair reviewing various books related to the subject. Today I will be looking at not a book, but a magazine. This is, if you look at the red border and the big word Time at the top, you say, okay, that's a Time magazine. It's not quite a Time magazine. It is the special Time edition of diabetes. I saw this at the grocery store as I was checking out, and it kind of got my attention. I had a feeling that there'd probably be a few things in it that I wouldn't like, but there would probably be some good things in it as well, and that's pretty much how it came out. But for today, in this little short session, we're going to talk about just a few of the quotes at the beginning part of this edition of Diabetes from Diagnosis to Empowerment. Well, that's a good choice of words, good marketing title, empowerment. We all want power, don't we? We want to be empowered. So, and I really do believe we can be through wisdom. One of the things that they say on the very first page is that the past decade has welcomed the emergence of two new classes of drugs that many experts are hailing as generational advances. And I'm like, you couldn't get past the first page without talking about drugs. I mean, to me, drugs is like the absolute last resort and not something anybody would get too excited about if they knew they could beat it some other way without drugs. But I mean, they waste no time at all. Just a few paragraphs and boom, here they go. We've got two new super powerful diabetes drugs that can help. Well, they've been creating diabetes drugs for the last century. And we're still facing a tremendous epidemic of diabetes all over the world, despite the drugs. And despite the drugs, people are bouncing all over the place. They don't have good control over their blood sugars. So and maybe these drugs work. I'm not going to even get into what the names of them are or what they do. I'm just saying that if you can beat it with lifestyle and diet particularly, that is the first thing to try for sure. And that's worked for me. All right, second quote. Says there's evidence that avoiding processed foods, getting regular exercise, and managing stress may all provide benefits in reducing the burden of type 2 diabetes. So, avoiding processed food, regular exercise, managing stress. Now, there's truth to that. I can't just give it a blanket condemnation for that statement, but there's things implied in that statement I really don't like too much. And one of the things is something I hear all the time, and that is the two-word phrase, processed foods, as though that is going to solve all your problems if you can just avoid processed foods. Well, the reason, there's a good reason why processed foods are a problem, and that is they're mostly carbs. So you go down the aisles and you look at the donuts and the snack cakes and you look at all the chips and they're all processed and they're all carbs. But I don't say I avoid processed foods so much. I will just say I don't want to eat high-carb foods, period. Processed or not processed. I mean, after all, a hot dog is a processed food, but it sure won't raise my blood sugar like a bag of chips will. So part of it is not just the processing. Part of it is just how many carbs are in that particular food. But they don't dare say it. If I was writing that paragraph, I'd say there's evidence that eating sugary foods and starchy foods raises blood sugar and makes your diabetes much, much worse, or gives you diabetes if you didn't have it before. Starches and sugars. But that's become uncool to say. The cool thing these days is processed foods. Oh, I don't eat processed foods. Huh, are you kidding me? Processed foods? Well, I wouldn't touch a processed food with a 10-foot pole. I spit on processed foods. Well, all right. I'm getting a little crazy here, but you get the point. It's almost like they're just too scared to say starches and sugars, and so the cool thing these days is to say avoid processed foods. Well, the truth is, if you avoid all processed foods, you'll do yourself a favor because, as mentioned, they're mostly carbs. Not all, but mostly. But why not just come out and say starches and sugars? And then the other thing that I don't so much care about this paragraph, or this sentence, it lists the processed foods and then exercise and then managing stress. And it sort of gives you the idea that they're all equal. I've got to manage stress. That's about a third of the battle. And then I've got to stop eating the processed foods. That's about another third. Then I got to exercise. That's about a third as well. Let me tell you something. Diet is like, for the type 2 I'm talking about, I'm not talking about type 1, but for the type 2 diabetic, diet is not like a third of the struggle or a third of the tool in your toolkit. Diet is like 90% of the battle. And I'll never forget a young Indian man that was terribly diabetic. And he whipped diabetes by watching my channel and some others. And I asked him, well, during this process, I think it was about a 6-month process, he went from being raging diabetic to not diabetic at all, according to his A1C. And he slimmed down and everything was great. His markers were all good. So he saw tremendous success. And I asked him, as I interviewed him, during this process, did you exercise? You know what his answer was? Nope, I didn't exercise at all. Now, I'm not recommending that. I'm not saying that's the way to go. I do believe in exercise. But it's not a third of the battle. It's not a fourth of the battle. It's not 20% of the battle. It's a small part of the battle. Your battle primarily will be won or lost according to what you allow yourself to put in your mouth. They've got a long section on what is type 2 diabetes, and they don't sound quite exactly sure, but here's something they say. What causes type 2 diabetes? It's a simple question with a complicated answer. It's hard to pull out a single cause, but everyone in the field agrees excess weight due to increased body fat leads to this cascade of issues that can lead to insulin resistance. And he goes on to say, we also see that when people lose weight, a lot of this is reversed. So that's why there's so much focus on weight. In other words, we find out that most diabetics are overweight, and when we can get them to lose weight, a lot of their symptoms go away. And sometimes they become non-diabetic according to their A1C and their fasting glucose. Well, I've seen that too. It's kind of hard to say which comes first, because when you go low carb, you'll typically lose weight. And some people would say, well, yeah, you're not really overcoming diabetes by low carb. You're overcoming it by losing weight, but the low carb causes the weight loss. However you want to say it, there's no question in my mind that weight does have a lot to do with diabetes. On the other hand, some slim people are diabetic and some very heavy people are not diabetic, at least not according to their A1C. So it's not quite such an easy thing to say, but I would agree that weight has a lot to do with it. And of course, as I mentioned in a previous program, the worst weight you can have is weight across your middle that's getting into your liver and your pancreas. That's the kind of weight that'll really do you in. But they say we find that when people lose weight, they lose their diabetes oftentimes. And that's true. I've seen that from testimonies again and again. All right, one more quote and we will be done for our little mini lecture today. Here's a person, they're talking about drugs now, and diabetic drugs, obviously, diabetic meds. And they say a lot of people see diabetes as a lifestyle problem, and they decide they'll just work on that and they don't need medications. In an ideal world, yes, many people could manage diabetes with lifestyle, but the truth is that we need additional tools, including medications. Well, again, we're talking type 2 diabetes here. And it's not my place to tell you whether you should take meds or not, and some people do and some don't. But I have heard from a lot of folks that just said, well, doc, they asked their doctor permission. They say, doctor, how about if you give me 3 months to try to turn this thing around, without the meds. Give me 3 months, and if I can't do it, then I'll take the meds. And oftentimes, the doctor will agree. He'll say, all right, you've got 3 months or 4 months, whatever it is, whatever bargain they strike with their doctor. And they just go crazy cutting their carbohydrates because they heard somewhere, or maybe watched a few of my videos, or there's a lot of other people saying the same thing, that when you cut the carbohydrates way down in your diet, don't have to turn them into zero, but you cut them way down, your blood sugar comes down. And typically you will fall below diabetic levels somewhere between 4 to 6 months if you're really serious about it. So he says, in an ideal world, you could fix your diabetes with just lifestyle. Let me add a little Dennis Pollock correction here. It doesn't take an ideal world. We use that term a lot, meaning, well, yeah, maybe theoretically you could, but you really can't. So when he says in an ideal world, he's saying, well, theoretically, maybe you could fix it without meds, but this isn't ideal and you really won't be able to. I've heard from one diabetic after another, into the hundreds, if not thousands, who said, I fixed it, and I either I didn't take any meds, or I stopped taking meds at a certain point, or my doctor told me you don't need to take meds anymore. And the good news for most type 2 diabetics is, hear me clearly, you don't need an ideal world to see victory over diabetes by changing your diet. Without the ideal world, I'm not an ideal person. And none of the people that I've interviewed and that I've heard from that beat diabetes and reversed it and got their numbers down, they're not ideal. Our world is not ideal. Where I live is not ideal. Nothing is ideal in this world. And yet, in an unideal world, if you'll be wise as a type 2 diabetic, there's an excellent chance, I can't guarantee it, but there's an excellent chance you can go from diabetic to non-diabetic within a relatively short time. And if by chance it takes more than just a short time, let's say it takes a year, year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, it's worth the effort. Because once you get to that point of non-diabetic and the symptoms are all reversing and retreating, and you're feeling so much better, and your doctor's smiling when he runs tests on you and telling you you're not diabetic anymore, it's worth whatever amount of effort and time it takes. But the good news is, for most type 2s, it's not going to take years and years and years. It may take months and months and months. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our uploads page is in the description.